Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. How we all doing tonight? Hello, Sherry and Bob. What? Well, it's 5:50 p.m. here in Ellensburg. We'll begin our program at 6 o'clock. A dead battery in our clock. Timex. This episode brought to you by Timex. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. You need a fresh battery. How we doing? How's the text looking on the screen? How's the audio on this very windy evening? We doing okay? Thumbs up. Sound issues, you say? Well, you know, I've got a little piece of plastic kind of wrapped around the phone here a little bit, trying to just practice. That's our experimentation tonight. About 30-mile-an-hour winds here, so we can't expect ideal conditions, I guess. In fact, I want to see if our buddy the globe can not get blown off its pedestal. That'll be a good test. Now, from this past weekend, I'm a little bit gun shy, so I guess I never noticed. That text looks good to you? It's backwards in my screen here, but maybe it's always been backwards, and I just never noticed. So the text is reasonable. Woo! 35 miles an hour. Okay, good. Oh yeah, we got the techies helping out here, and that's great. Thank you. I've learned a lot from you. I got a quick story for you before we begin. Probably watch Bijou fly through the air here. So for those unfamiliar with our valley here, this is a common occurrence in springtime especially, and so we were parents of 3 boys. Soccer season in the spring, and you're just so we have afternoons like this, and then it'll calm down a little bit later tonight. But anyway, my story is, I set up everything about an hour ago or so, I think. I went inside to change, and I have this huge kind of double plexiglass case for my maps. Super heavy, primarily because of the wind, and I don't want the maps flying around, so if they're in this case, I feel pretty good. I had the fine folks down at Woods Ace Hardware cut the plexiglass for me. This episode brought to you by Woods Ace Hardware. You gotta love it. Downtown Ellensburg. Anyway, I had about 5 or 6 maps right out there in the grass, laying flat down in the grass. You can tell where this story is going. I went in probably 7 or 8 minutes to change into some decent clothes. And I came back out the mudroom, and out by the roses were 3 big maps with some rocks laying on them. And I'm like, oh, this is like Easter all over again. Somebody dropped off some maps for me. That's cool. People have been dropping stuff off a little bit lately. So I go over it. I don't make the connection that they're my maps until I'm like opening, and I'm like, wait a minute. they had blown halfway down the block, and whoever was out walking. So if you're watching tonight, thank you for chasing my maps down and anchoring them out by the rose garden. So I've just got one map that is crucial to us tonight, and the rest I can kind of use the chalkboard, that sort of stuff. We still doing okay? It's actually quite warm. It's about 60 degrees. Foam. I don't really know what that means. I've gotten that tip from a few people. Foam. So I've got this like packing foam. I don't know. I can't really show you. Like thick, kind of like peanut. No. I don't know. If you can be a little bit more descriptive about the foam, I'll give it a try. But I don't know. It's got an ambient. I want you to be in the backyard with me, man. If I'm getting blown away, I want you to be blown away. Not really. The sun behind a decent cloud, but then I see a bunch of blue, so I think we're going to get a bunch of strong sun, which is a nice surprise because we've been overcast all day here in Washington State, at least in this part of Washington State. Yeah, I think I'm thinking about Seattle. I'm getting all hot and bothered. I'll read a few comments from you. We've got 3 minutes. Good afternoon, New Zealand. Tenino, that's going to be part of our story tonight, briefly. Patrick, good afternoon, good evening. I forget where you live, Patrick. Oh, you live in Washington. Hello, Alberta. You guys are loyal from Red Deer. Thank you. Utah. Terrific to see so many of you. We've already got 350 whatever, 360 whatever. Hello, Indy. Portland, say hi to my kid. Houston, East Tennessee. You know, I think this weekend, this weekend thing about mornings, I think I'm going to stick with that. We get plenty of international folks, and it's fun to include them. So tomorrow night, come on back. We'll talk about a mountain pass that's between Ellensburg and Seattle called Snoqualmie Pass. And there's some interesting geology up there. Yakima River Canyon on Thursday at 6 p.m. as well. These are Pacific times, of course. And then on this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 9 o'clock in the morning, like we did this past weekend. And again, I'm picking some topics on the weekend that perhaps have a bit of more universal appeal. I don't know how much you speak for a living, but I've had a lot of repetition, practice speaking to groups, and there are days when the words just flow like honey, and it's just not one missed word. I don't think tonight's one of those nights. I've already screwed up. I gotta wake up my mouth here. Me me mamamoo, me me mamamoo. Then I gotta wake up my brain. That's more of a problem. See, we've had online classes begin, so I've got all sorts of stuff going on with my students. But that's my paying gig, man. I can't use that as an excuse. I can't use that as an excuse. Good Lord, this could be a problem this evening. Hello and thank you. Welcome. What time is it on the wall? If we have new people tonight, they've already clicked us off. This guy's a clown. Yeah, baby, fresh air, baby. It's the top of the hour. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my backyard. My name is Dick Zentner. I teach geology at Central Washington University in Ellensburg here. And I've been doing these live streams for a few weeks now, and I'm happy that you're with us tonight, especially if you're brand new. Children, are you joining us tonight? Is this part of your homeschooling assignments? And your parents said you should learn a little bit of science tonight. I hope they're with you. I hope you guys can learn together. The topic tonight is Seattle, Washington. But it's more than just downtown Seattle, and you would have guessed that, right? We're going to talk about the region around Seattle, and I'd like to focus on two primary areas of geology that are important in the Seattle area from my point of view. We'll address a couple of others quite quickly, and then we'll open it up, of course, as we always do, to live question and answer. So hold off on your questions if you're new to us. I'm not looking at the comments right now, and we'll get to the Q&A when I'm done sharing some of the concepts with you. But no time like the present. Let's get at it, okay? Seattle, Washington, during the Ice Age, was under a thick glacier. And I know Seattle is near the mountains, but it was not a mountain glacier. It was a thick ice sheet. An ice sheet that came down from Canada, an ice sheet that crept over the border into Washington, and that ice sheet came all the way over Seattle. The ice sheet came over Tacoma, the ice sheet came over Olympia, and the ice sheet got as far south as a little town called Tenino, Washington. I hope you can see this, and if you can't, I'm going to adjust you so that you can. Tenino, the dinky little town of Tenino is our southernmost margin of this Puget Lobe ice sheet. So pretty much everything you see on this map, from downtown Seattle to Issaquah, these are towns now, over to North Bend, to Tenino, Olympia, Tacoma, Orting will factor into our discussion tonight. Everything is under thick ice. There were 7 different advances, at least. We have evidence of at least 7 different times that ice sheet came down from Canada. So it wasn't just a one-time thing, but the most recent advance was at its maximum size 16,500 years ago. And that's a tweaked age from stuff that you may have seen if you're a geology fan. 16,900 was used for a while, even a little bit older than 17,000 was used for a while. But we now have new dates to push it to 16,500. That's a nice round number for us to use. And starting about 16,500 years ago, that ice sheet down here at Tenino started to retreat. And apparently the retreat was much more rapid than the advance. So you can think of this slowly marching ice sheet working its way south. The maximum thickness of the ice over Seattle during that last advance was 3,000 feet. And then a pretty quick retreat, almost like the Puget ice sheet was just kind of dead and kind of shriveled up like the Wicked Witch of the West. And the timing of that is based on glacial deposits. So let me show you a couple of drawings to give you a visual of what that ice sheet looked like. And then let me show you one of my whiteboards to give you an idea of the kinds of deposits that we've studied. And by we mean researchers in the last 100 years, including J. Harlan Bretz, I might add, the guy that we talked about last week. He's a big part of tonight. what kind of deposits can we study to prove that the ice was here, that the ice was here at a certain time, that the ice melted back quite quickly? And what things out in front of the ice can we imagine? That's really the first part of this. The other part of this discussion will involve the Seattle Fault and earthquakes. So those are the two things I have in mind. Okay, but we're still talking about ice so far. So, visuals. Here's an old map that I like to use that I've had for a long time. I inherited it from a couple of my predecessors at Central Washington University. It folds up really nicely. And this is our this is a map from 1961. We got a little shadow here. But so much of this stuff in yellow is called QG1. And those are glacial deposits. So if you can kind of get your bearings, notice that the freeways aren't on this map. This is 1961. But you can see a substantial part of the Puget Lowland has this glacial deposit material. If you're a rookie to geology, you don't know what that means yet, but there's a lot of these glacial deposits. In other words, rocks and sand and gravel and even boulders that were that were dropped by the ice. And even though the ice is gone, we still have all that stuff that got dropped by the ice. More images from the stuff that hasn't blown away yet. Here's a more modern geologic map from the Washington Geological Survey. This is the entire state of Washington, of course. But if we zoom in, we can see all that yellow. And all that yellow is a significant amount of glacial till. Just think of it like a bunch of sand and gravel that makes a huge layer that's sitting on top of a lot of bedrock. Okay? Got a couple more for you. You know that I'm a fan of the late Bates McKee, I always screw that up, Bates McKee, from his classic geology textbook that's out of print now called Cascadia. I like Bates for many reasons, including he's not afraid to be real simple when he needs to. So here's Bates in 1970 showing us the terminal moraine, which is a ridge of glacial till that marks the outline of where that ice sheet used to be. So you'll notice that that ice sheet was sitting in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That ice sheet was covering all these places. That ice sheet was lapping right up against the high walls of the Cascades. But this line that Bates is drawing for us is a terminal moraine. I'll show you that on my whiteboard in just a second. But this is a nice diagram to show this. The analogy I like to use is a terminal moraine is a ridge of glacial rocks that's like a chalk body. A terminal moraine is like a chalk line that you draw around a dead body at the beginning of a crime show. And before they haul the body off to the morgue, the police outline the body, then they take the body away, and that chalk line is still there for us. So in this particular case, the ice sheet is the dead body. It's gone. It got hauled off to the morgue, aka Greenland. Stupid. I think you've got the idea, in general, about ice being a major part of not only the deposits, but these bodies of water. Have you figured out yet, especially if you're viewing from overseas, you may not know, this is where Seattle's located, but this is Lake Washington. This is a freshwater lake. This is Lake Sammamish. Like, why are those lakes there? How long have they been there? Were they there before the ice sheet? Are they there only because of the ice sheet? This is Puget Sound, which is saltwater. This is Hood Canal, which is saltwater. Olympic Peninsula, one of our live streams, I guess last week or whatever, I've lost track of time, as you have, is off to the left. And we're going to Snoqualmie Pass, which is to the east of North Bend tomorrow. Okay, deposits time. To reconstruct where a glacier was, even though the ice is gone, you primarily use two main features. And we'll do this again tomorrow night when we're up in the mountains at Snoqualmie Pass. So you see that a glacier is not just ice that's sitting there, but it's a glacier that actually flows. Glaciers are like rivers in slow motions. Even an ice sheet is, oh, you know what? There's one more I want to show you. I don't know if I've shared this one yet with you. This is a wonderful new edition of Roadside Geology for Washington, written by Marley Miller at the University of Oregon and her former advisor at the University of Washington, Darrell Cowan. Beautiful book, rich with detail and rich with illustrations. I'm not sure this map is theirs, but what reminded me to show this to you is you can see, if I can get in close enough, can you see those kind of flow lines? That the ice, it's not just a stagnant body of ice, but it's actually flowing down from Canada. And there's kind of areas where the ice is just kind of flowing out and bringing rocks and dropping rocks. Okay, I've hit that too hard. So we've got it. There's all this rock coming south with the ice. But the rocks are different sizes, what have in the ice here. Notice it's not just on the bottom of the ice, but it's within the ice. This whole ice sheet, thousands of feet thick, is carrying rock kind of in slow motion. And big boulders and river cobbles and sand grains alike, they're all being carried, but they're being carried at the same distance. If you're a tiny sand grain or a boulder the size of our house, you're going to be moved the same distance. And you're going to be dropped at the same place, which is at the end of the line. And that's what a glacial moraine is. It's a ridge composed of poorly sorted rocks, meaning that nobody came through and sorted out the rocks by size. There's lots of different kinds of rocks, including boulders and sand grains, all sitting together. But out in front of a moraine, which is less well known and important to many of us, but not important to others, is something called glacial outwash, and that's a key part of tonight. Because I'm willing to say, even though I think that map disagrees with me, what I've heard from Ralph Haggerud and a few others who have spent a lot of time mapping glacial deposits in South Puget Sound, there's way more glacial outwash than there is glacial till. So what's the outwash? The outwash is there because the ice was in the picture, but the outwash, as you maybe can guess, is interpreted as running water, meltwater, coming off of this melting glacier. Actually, even if the ice is advancing, I suppose there's a bunch of sloppy water coming off the front. So how do you know if you're looking at glacial outwash or glacial moraines? The difference is the glacial outwash is sorted. So you have layers. I'm going to show you a quick video here in just a bit to give you a sense of what those rocks look like. So they're layered. They look like river rocks and sand deposits in a river system. So I think glacial outwash is often not recognized for being important because most of us will just, look in a riverbank or whatever, look in a road cut and just see a bunch of river rocks and they go, I guess there was a river here once upon a time. Well, technically, I guess you're right, but it's really a case of just dozens and dozens of rivers coming off the front of this ice sheet and depositing a bunch of outwash. Last point is that quite often the top, not important, the top of the moraine matches the top of the outwash plain. So there's usually kind of a ramp. And so therefore there's a kind of a genetic connection between these two guys. So you ready? It's 16,500 years ago. What should we start doing in Puget Lowland? We got to start retreating our glacier. And as I mentioned at the start here, we're going to do this pretty quickly, according to the timing and the evidence that some of these geologists have put together. So the glacier's gone. It's totally gone. It's not like it's still around. It's gone. It's like still up in Greenland, but it's not anywhere close to Washington. And yet we have these kinds of deposits to look at to reconstruct in our mind as geologists where that ice used to be. Feeling okay? All right. Let's keep it moving. Everything's anchored down. Nothing's blown too far. I'm back to Bates one more time. I wish I would have had a chance to meet him. He died in a plane crash in Wenatchee with another geologist in the early 1980s. I already showed you that. Here's baits on the facing page. Hopefully you can get pretty close with this one. Do you see some stuff that looks familiar? You see our till and our outwash? In this case, Baits is showing us that we can lay down a bunch of outwash and then we can have the glacier be advancing. So what I kind of talked about was outwash until where the ice was at its maximum, and then the ice goes away. But this can also be true as you're advancing the Puget ice sheet. You lay down a broad apron of outwash and then the ice comes right over and top and buries it. But the new thing I want to add here is that I think you can see, maybe you can't. There's also kind of a bluish clay that some of you maybe have encountered if you've drilled your own well. If you live in Western Washington, you've drilled your own well, or somehow you know about deep boreholes into much of South Puget Sound, and this is common for any glaciated area, by the way. You run into sand and gravel, oftentimes, the outwash or the moraines, but you also sometimes run into this kind of deep bluish gray clay. And that's truly a lake bed, a glacial lake, where we have ponded fresh water, oftentimes out in front of the ice. So, I don't want to mess up my map too much, but I guess I'm going to. Let's have, this isn't the maximum extent now, right? I'm not going to draw like crazy, but here's our ice sheet, okay? And let's say, let's say that our ice sheet is still creeping south. So we are earlier than 16,500. What do you want, 17,000? 17,200 years ago? That's fine. Okay, so this is covered in ice, but this is not covered yet in ice. So we have our till, temporarily. We have our outwash, temporarily. But there's something else going on. Are you ahead of me now? If we got 3,000 feet of ice, isn't that pretty heavy? Think of the weight of an ice sheet sitting on the crust for centuries. So there's ways, and as I say this, I'm not sure how you figure it out, but there's ways to figure out that Washington here was depressed, was sunken, was pushed down by the weight of this ice sheet. And that's an important message, mainly because between the front of the ice and the area, we'll just say out in front of the ice, there was a lake, a glacial lake. And guess who documented it for the first time? That's right, J. Harlan Bretz. So if you don't know that name, you can go back a few live streams, and we devoted a program and a half to this guy, J. Harlan Bretz, who's most famous for his work in eastern Washington with the Missoula floods. But before he did his Missoula flood work, he was a high school teacher for 4 years in Seattle, and he was making beautiful glacial maps that ended up being his PhD dissertation at the University of Chicago. He named that temporary glacial lake Glacial Lake Russell, after an influential geologist who got him interested in moving to Washington named I.C. Russell. I mention that because there were times that our ice is in place, the crust is depressed, there's all this water that's draining away from the mountain. I need a map. That one did blow away. I don't know where it is. Okay, I just have to do it verbally. Can you visualize a bunch of rivers draining Mount Rainier, draining all the high mountains and the Olympics off here and the Cascades off here? Where does that water get to eventually today? Today, those rivers get to the Puget Sound. Whoop, I said the Puget Sound. Okay, Puget Sound, and then that water drains to the ocean. But think of it. We have a huge ice sheet sitting here. There's no way for fresh water coming out of the mountains south of this ice sheet to get to the ocean, right? So because the crust is low and we've got this huge ice blockage, we've got this ever-growing freshwater lake, Lake Russell, out in front of the ice. And as the ice continues to move south, Lake Russell gets pushed further and further to the south. I'm leading to this. J. Harlan Bretz, not only with all the blue clay documented Lake Russell, but he found a place where Lake Russell was so deep that it started spilling into the Chehalis River and flowed to Aberdeen Hoquiam. Not necessarily a huge catastrophic flood like the Missoula floods, but he did find some evidence, whatever drainage that is. That's US Highway 12 from Olympia. I should know that drainage. I can't think of it right now. I'm sure you've got it. He's got evidence of Ice Age rivers draining Lake Russell. Okay, I'm sure you've got stuff you want to ask about that, but I'm not ready for it yet. Let me check my notes. Oh, how could I have forgotten? So there's one other concept that's really cool. It's the formation of these lakes. And in general, these two lakes, again, this is Lake Sammamish and Lake Washington. You know them, right? The floating bridge on I-90 is going over Lake Washington. I-90 goes just to the south of Lake Issaquah. Okay, Lake Sammamish, excuse me. These were bigger lakes at one time. They were glacial lakes as well. And Bretz did all sorts of walking in this area and figured out there was an interesting time when you would overflow one glacial lake and have water spill to the next. And then that lake would overfill and that would spill to the next as this ice sheet is kind of backing up. There was even another glacial lake that no longer exists. He called it Glacial Lake Snoqualmie. It's now kind of over by, close to North Bend. My point is, if you know the I-90 drive, and many of us do quite well, we could drive it with our eyes closed. Some of us do by looking at our phones while we're texting. Don't do that, kids. There are these impressive chutes, these dramatic drops in elevation as you're driving from North Bend to Seattle. One of them is, you're right there at 405, and there's that dramatic drop just to the east of 405 where it intersects with I-5. That's a chute where water is, an Ice Age river was draining glacial Lake Sammamish and going down to Washington. And then there was another one kind of by Falls City. And you're like, okay, I don't think I totally see what you're getting. You want to go in the Cozy Fort? Before we do, I've already mentioned briefly, and I'm still processing this, but my old collaborator, Tom Foster, passed away about a month ago. And we made a bunch of geology videos. He was a guy that worked in agriculture. He just had an interest and he made these videos basically in his kitchen. He was all self-taught. Made all these maps and animations and we went out and filmed all sorts of stuff together. And we made an I-90 Rocks series. And the first episode was Seattle, and the second episode of I-90 Rocks was Seattle to North Bend. And I rewatched those this morning, took a few notes, reminded myself what we were doing, and got all sad. But anyway, I want to show you a little snippet from the Issaquah area, because there's a landmark that many of you might know. Can you picture driving east on I-90, leaving Bellevue, climbing up to Lake Sammamish? You with me? And can you picture a big old gravel pit? Right on the left, right on the north of the highway, right before you leave Issaquah, right by Krispy Kreme, donuts. Well, we made contact with those guys at the quarry, got in there, got permission to film, got to visit with Pat and a few of the other guys who had found all sorts of boulders, and that's a key part of this spilling of one glacial lake to the next, and I want to show it with you as much as I can. So you know how this went last time. It eventually worked, but it took a while. I've got to mute myself. That's painful. I've got to open this bookmarked page. This is where the guy talks to himself. This is part of the program where the older guy talks to himself. Okay, I'm ready to go full screen with Tom. I got a flapping piece of paper over there, drives me crazy, but I can get over it. I got the Cozy Fort blanket. Some of you have had suggestions about getting a cardboard box and all sorts of things. Well, I may go there, but this is... Oh, there's the train. All right, let's enjoy the work of Tom. And using picture-picture, let's visit the Issaquah Rock Quarry. And go. And go.
Connected once again with the salty Pacific Ocean. The only freshwater remains of the massive glacial lakes of the Ice Age? Today's Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish. Well, that's a cool story, but this is I-90 rocks. How much of the story can you see from the freeway? Well, for starters, surely you've noticed a huge gravel pit in Issaquah at exit 17.
Does that look familiar to you?
This is the lakeside gravel pit, right next to Interstate 90 at Issaquah. It's an active mine. They're pulling sand and gravel out of this huge deposit. Much of the sand and gravel was already used to build Interstate 90 a few decades ago. Why is there so much sand and gravel here?
Notice the bedding.
Ice Age deposit. It's not a moraine, though. This is an Ice Age river delta.
An Ice Age river delta.
Ice Age river flowed into glacial Lake Sammamish.
This is like
River deltas form when rivers enter quiet bodies of water. The famous Mississippi River Delta in Louisiana is made of silt. But here in Issaquah, the delta is made of sorted sand and even gravel, a fast-moving Ice Age river, one of those spillways between glacial lakes. In this case, glacial Lake Snoqualmie, overtopping its rim and spilling southwest through surrounding uplands toward glacial Lake Sammamish. So how can we be sure this is a river delta? Couldn't it be a moraine or something else during the Ice Age? It's the bedding here. These are inclined beds of sand and gravel, 4 set beds in the guts of this river delta. Here's how it works. Ice Age river coming into glacial Lake Sammamish. The river's bringing sand and gravel, but the sand and gravel is being dumped as the river's going into the lake because the speed of the river is dropping to nothing. Each new batch of sand and gravel is getting dumped down the face of this delta underwater, big avalanches of sand and gravel, and therefore the delta continues to grow, continues to build out into the lake. And the height of the delta is the height of glacial Lake Sammamish long ago.
we got to stick with it. Here's the money shot.
Up on top of the delta, there's a nice flat bench. That's the old shoreline of glacial Lake Sammamish. That's Lake Sammamish today. During the Ice Age, Lake Sammamish was up to here. This was the lake level.
Yeah, baby.
Beachfront property at that lake during the Ice Age, right here.
Nice.
Wood fragments
All right.
at the bottom of the delta have been dated at 15,500 years old.
You want to see one more?
In 1991,
Not a Tom's thing, but I guess while I've got you here.
log was found near the top of the delta.
Shut up. Here's another one. I'm just going to go ahead and play it. I'm going to go ahead and play it. You can find this one on YouTube too. It moves kind of slowly, but there's a lot going on. The deep blue is the salt water. Here comes our ice. Nice animation now. You can just type in Puget Lobe animation and you'll find this. There's the outwash in that whatever color that is, greenish brown. But I mainly want to show you that we've got the huge lake out in front, Lake Russell, when this ice starts to back away. Remember, our crust is depressed. That sounds like the crust is sad, but you know what I mean. Come on. There we go. It's all fresh water. There's no salt water. We're not going to get any salt water in Puget Lowland until we open the Strait of Juan de Fuca again. Still fresh water. Here's where we're doing the Issaquah Delta, right about there. There we go. Now we change to salt water because we opened the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And so the finishing touch is the only 2 freshwater lakes that remain that are significant in size are in those 2 troughs, Sammamish and Washington. Last comment, and then we'll move over to the Seattle Fault thing if you're getting tired of glacial stuff. Have you noticed, for those that have driven in downtown Seattle, have you ever bicycled in downtown Seattle? You really get a feel for the lay of the land, don't you, if you're actually doing the pedaling? You know what I'm about to say? Think of all the steep streets in downtown Seattle. All the steep streets go east-west, right? And all the streets that go north and south in downtown Seattle are in these elongate little troughs. Those are glacial troughs, where the glacier is truly like fingers on the chalkboard here. And there's still debate among geologists, is it fresh water under the ice that's under high pressure that's actually digging? Like, are those troughs, are those north-south depressions the result of water? Or is it just the ice, the base of the ice, that's kind of sculpting like truly fingers? 35 years ago, when I was first taking a glacial geology class with a bunch of grad students, I might add, I was out over my head for sure. There was no talk of running water underneath ice sheets or even alpine glaciers, but we now realize that, especially because of work by British Columbia geologists, that we might have way more running water underneath the ice, and recent discoveries in Antarctica and the ice sheet there, etc. Okay, that's plenty with the ice. We're already at 6:30. I got 10 minutes of Seattle Fault, and then I'm going to go jump on this blowing piece of paper like it's a landmine. Excuse me. Okay, switching gears. I moved to Ellensburg in 1992. And in the newspapers, this is before the internet, of course, in the newspapers, I was reading about something called the Seattle Fault that was newly discovered. And everybody was freaking out. Because the Seattle Fault was placed on the map right underneath Interstate 90. The Seattle Fault, a newly discovered earthquake fault found right beneath the Kingdome at the time. Now it's no longer, but it's the sports stadiums essentially. And it was work done by Brian Atwater. And again, you've heard about Brian Atwater before, but that was with work with the great earthquakes at the Washington coast. But Atwater and others were in Puget Lowland and finding very interesting and exciting geology evidence to prove that there was an earthquake on the Seattle Fault that people barely knew anything about. They didn't even really understand that the Seattle Fault was a thing. But with Atwater's techniques, by getting carbon dates, by getting tree rings on logs that were killed and found in a tsunami deposit, etc., he came up with a date for roughly the year 900 AD. Big earthquake, Seattle Fault, 900 AD. And remember now, this is the early 1990s, so people aren't even thinking about earthquakes in Washington. Now this guy says, by the way, beneath our biggest city is this amazing fault where the south side of the fault lifted 21 feet at the snap of a finger compared to the north side of the Seattle Fault. I'm talking about what happened during the earthquake on the Seattle Fault, according to Brian Atwater and others, the year 900 AD. So what kind of evidence did he find to prove that there was 21 feet of sudden movement? That's significant. And it's not a San Andreas fault, so what kind of fault is it? If we've got land going up and down, like if my backyard had a Seattle Fault, half the lawn would go up 21 feet compared to the other side. Or you can think of it the opposite way. Half my backyard is going to drop 21 feet. Okay. The first answer is the Seattle Fault is a reverse fault. So let's draw a cross-section. Let's draw a cross-section. So you can see that the Seattle Fault, if the glare isn't too bad, The Seattle Fault is an east-west structure. Just to the south of the Seattle Fault are the Issaquah Alps. Just to the south of the Seattle Fault is Alki Point. Just to the south of the Seattle Fault is Restoration Point on the southern tip of Bainbridge Island. Those are key places that have been studied to prove of the existence of the Seattle Fault. So this whiteboard is showing us a cross-section. So it's important for us. Here's the map. Now I want to take this whiteboard and I want to go like that. I want to go into the board, like just imagine a big slot in this chalkboard. I'm going to put the whiteboard on into it. I'm going to gather all the info, draw it on the whiteboard, and then pull this thing out and show it to you. I don't know if I can do this both. Maybe I can. So I hope your spatial skills are such that you can kind of see this. So there's north and there's south, and here's the Seattle Fault. And if you were with us long ago when we were talking about different kinds of faults, I hope that you can see that this is a reverse fault. The Seattle Fault is a reverse fault. And the last time that it ruptured to make an earthquake, the last time these two blocks of crust suddenly jumped past each other was the year 900 AD, plus or minus a couple of decades. And it's this south side of the fault that lifted 21 feet compared to the south. You get normal fault earthquakes like we had in Utah a few weeks ago when you pull the crust apart and the hanging wall drops compared to the footwall. We're not going to go through it again. We don't have time. And a reverse fault like the Seattle Fault, good Lord, somebody turn this off. There goes the cozy fort blanket. There goes the 1961 map. I have neighbors, they'll find them. Push the crust together, and we get 21 feet of uplift compared to the other side. So, two questions. Why are we squeezing the crust north and south to make earthquakes on the Seattle Fault? Second question, what evidence did Atwater and others find to prove the date and to prove the 21 feet? And then I guess the third obvious question is it going to happen again? Or are there other faults that have been found nearby? And the answer is yes, unfortunately. So, let me answer your question about what evidence for the Seattle Fault. Well, people that have snorkeled or I don't know what they were doing, screwing around on the floor of Lake Washington, but they found an underwater forest. They found standing trees, like a ghost forest at the bottom of Lake Washington. And they determined that that forest was killed by the Seattle Fault, by the sudden land and drop and the submerge and the whole thing. So geologists found those sunken trees in this underwater forest on the floor of Lake Washington. Tree ring analysis figured out 900 AD. Okay, well, I guess that could be something else. That wouldn't be the Seattle Fault. What else do we have? Atwater was in Discovery Park near Adele's house. And they were putting in a sewage treatment plant in the early 90s. And Atwater, who had just made his discoveries on the West Coast, said, hey, when you've got that park opened up at West Point, basically, if you know Seattle, right near the Ballard Locks, when you've got that all opened up, can I go in there and take a look? I want to see if there's a tsunami deposit from what we think might be the Seattle Fault, because the Seattle Fault goes underneath Puget Sound water. So he was thinking maybe there was a tsunami that was generated by the Seattle Fault earthquake, 900 AD, in places where we had the 21 feet of motion on the floor of Puget Sound. Well, guess what? He not only found in that excavation at Discovery Park the tsunami deposit, similar to what we talked about last week, the mud, remember, coming in, the tsunami sand coming in a place that should have a bunch of mud. But he found this amazing, I think it was a Douglas fir log that clearly came in with the tsunami waves. So you could actually date the log, and the log was clearly killed and moved by the earthquake tsunami, and so he had way more to work with than he had ever imagined. There's some charcoal and some bogs on Restoration Point that you can get some dates on, carbon-14 dates. There were some rock avalanches on the Olympic Peninsula that have been dated as well. So this is a regional story from the Seattle Fault earthquake. And of course, we're concerned not only for the next earthquake on the Seattle Fault, because the squeezing has continued, but since the discovery of the Seattle Fault, well, of course, we started looking for faults. Well, there's the Tacoma Fault, there's the Saddle Mountain Fault, there's the South Whidbey Island Fault. There's now dozens of these faults that we didn't even know about that have been discovered in the last 15 to 20 years. The biggest and most intoxicating piece of evidence for the Seattle Fault was, I've screwed up my map here now, but if you know Bainbridge, you take the ferry from downtown Seattle over to Bainbridge. All the tourists do it. I did it when I was a tourist here. And you get off at what used to be called Winslow, and then just south of that there's a golf course right at the very southern tip of Bainbridge Island. It's a private golf course, and there's a gated, and we talked our way into there. Thank you, I forgot your name. And that bench where the golf course is was a marine bench. It was under the water of Puget Sound, and during this earthquake, 900 AD, that bench suddenly lifted right out of the water. That was the south side of the Seattle Fault that lifted 21 feet, and that water and others put that together. I got two more things I want to say, and then we go to your questions. Nah, I was going to talk about coal. There's coal. Oh, you know what? So almost all of Puget Lowland is glacial till and glacial outwash. But there's just a few places where the outwash is gone, where the glacial till is not there. And instead, there's bedrock. This green is the Blakely Formation, which is a bunch of bedrock layers that I don't understand very well, deposited during the Eocene. But below those are very rich coal beds. So some of you may be aware that there was a major coal mining industry south of the Seattle Fault, where it got lifted close to the surface. Newcastle, Black Diamond, those were places that were massively mined for coal, and it's because the Seattle Fault brought those coal beds up. On the other side, there's hundreds of feet at least, where there's glacial till and glacial outwash sitting on top of that bedrock. So this is a major structure, and I'm not saying that there was just one fault on the Seattle Fault. We've got hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 feet of offset on this fault, and so we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of quakes. But I do need to, that's still here, it hasn't blown away. It wouldn't be a live stream without showing this. Why do we have the squeezing to make the earthquakes on the Seattle Fault? And the answer is the clockwise rotation. Here it comes again. And we'll use this again on Thursday when we talk about the Yakima River Canyon. So we've got the squeezing because everything here is moving north except for Canada, and we continue to squeeze central Washington and Puget Lowland. Last thing I plan to share with you. I'm 270. I almost got blown over. I've shown you this before. I am going to get blown over, but you're worth it. I've shown you this before. It's a map showing Mount Rainier, and the yellow areas are river valleys that we are concerned about in the future for a major volcanic mud flow, otherwise known as a lahar, to come down that river valley. And so if you see your town with yellow, that's a river valley that has had a slurry of volcanic mud come down from Mount Rainier in the last 10,000 years. And I'm including this because you'll notice that if we get up towards Seattle, we don't have yellow. So we have no volcanic lahars. We have no, remember, a lahar is the result of an active cone that a portion of the cone falls away as a huge landslide, and then that landslide converts into a volcanic mudflow. We have no lahar deposits that get as far north as Seattle, but we do have lahar deposits that have gotten as far north as just south of Auburn. And there is that purple, and the purple is essentially redeposited lahar material, basically water draining away from a lahar and redepositing some of the lahar material down the Duwamish, going all the way to the Sodo district where the sports stadiums are. Speaking of that, I can't stop now. Seriously, every one of these is getting longer, but I hope you're enjoying it. I showed you this with the J. Harlan Bretz episode, but I'm reminding you that during the time that Bretz lived in Seattle, during the first decade of the 20th century, there was a major project to take all of the hills, not all, some of the hills of downtown Seattle and move them. Basically take a big old fire hose and you just start blasting away at this hill made out of what? Sand and gravel, glacial outwash, glacial till stuff. And they just basically dumped that sand and gravel into the bay to create new land to build more buildings. And here's one of the original maps that Bretz made down by Tenino, and you can see the level of detail that he had. But my point is, now that we know that there's a bunch of land in downtown Seattle that's simply the result of dumping glacial hills into Elliott Bay to make new land. I mean, there's literally garbage and sand and gravel that was dumped south of extreme downtown Seattle. And now I just said there's a huge earthquake that happened 900 AD, but we're concerned about the next earthquake on the Seattle Fault. Which area should we be, I don't want to freak you out, but which area should we be most concerned about? Wouldn't it be the stuff that was just dumped into the bay? What's that material going to behave like during the next Seattle Fault earthquake, or even a Tacoma Fault earthquake? I have a prop. Where am I from? Where did I grow up? That's right. I grew up in the Midwest. This is considered salad. It's Jell-O. Why am I showing it to you? I'm afraid this is what Sodo, this is what the mouth of the Duwamish River is going to do. I'm sorry to say it. This is what the football and the baseball stadiums are going to do. Even though they're anchored in some kind of solid glacial till, they've done their best, but that area is a very major concern. I'm no engineer. I'm not saying anything more than I'm equipped to say, but there's concern about the glacial deposits in general, but especially if you've got major buildings that have been built on top of this kind of stuff. Okay, it is 6:48, and I am ready for some of your questions. If you're new to us, we do questions in uppercase. I try to answer as many as I can. I especially look for children's questions. I wish I could hit them all. I can't. I'm going to scroll back and try to get some of the first uppercase that are arriving here. Let her rip. I'll try to answer them the best that I can. How do we know how thick the ice was? Great question. I've struggled with that. I keep meaning to look that up, and I don't. My best answer is, especially tomorrow, we're going to find some terminal moraines and some erratics that were deposited on the east and west side of the ice sheet at significant elevation. And so you do some connecting of the dots between high ice places, essentially, kind of going up into the Cascades and going up into the Olympics, and then extrapolating the thickness. But I'm not totally satisfied with that answer. We'll see if I can find something before tomorrow. Thanks for the question. Is there any evidence in Tacoma where the fault is? There is a Tacoma fault. And if you go, your best resource here is not me. It's the Washington Geological Survey. Those guys have done an amazing job, especially in the last few years, to revamp their website. They have a geology portal, they call it. You can find all sorts of maps, especially if you're from Western Washington. They can show you much better than I about exactly where that Seattle Fault trace is. But there's less known about the history of the Tacoma Fault quakes than there is on the Seattle Fault quakes. As far as I know, we don't even have a second to oldest quake yet on the Seattle Fault. So we are desperately needing an inventory of past earthquake dates on each fault that we have found to try to say something about the future. We're not there yet. We're just in the fault finding and tsunami dating era. And I can share an email with you. If I haven't had a visitor, have I? My neighbor is a gal that I work with who's been working on tsunami deposits in Puget Lowland for the last decade. And she was maybe going to show up, but she thought it was too windy to join us, which is fine. Her name is Bree McGinnis. I might share her email with you if you like, with the latest on what we know about tsunami sediments in Puget Lowland. According to your podcast, there were 30 ice advances during the Pleistocene. Is there any evidence of earlier glaciations, or did the most recent go furthest in this area? Thanks, Eric. Worldwide, we have evidence for many different advances and retreats. Back in the Midwest, where I'm from in Wisconsin, the most recent advance didn't get as far south as some of the older advances. And so that's helpful. We've got evidence of multiple advances. In Washington, both with the Puget lobe and the Okanagan lobe, the last advance, the most recent advance, went the farthest. So it's pretty tough to find evidence of the older advances without getting lucky with some exposures deep, and that's not an obvious thing. So there's scant evidence of those earlier advances, but there is some evidence. Is there an interval for the Seattle Fault? Just mentioned that. I don't think we do have that. Patrick, what do you think, Professor Nick? Do you think it was running water under the ice sheet, or do you think it was the ice making the north-south troughs? Thank you, Patrick. I am certainly open to both, and that's what a good science person should be. Until you have overwhelming evidence to say one's right and one's incorrect, you should stay open to all ideas, Patrick. In this case, many glacial geologists that I'm aware of and respect are running water people at the base of the ice. And so I'm leaning in that direction just because of those folks that I value. But there's more work to be done on that. Was the 2001 earthquake, the Nisqually earthquake, related to the Seattle Fault? No. We did an earthquake live stream like right at the beginning, probably like March 18th or something maybe. And we stressed that the Nisqually earthquake of 2001 was an earthquake generated deep within the subducting Juan de Fuca plate, totally unrelated to these shallow crustal earthquakes like the Seattle Fault. How do glacial sand deposits differ from ancient tsunami sand deposits? I think the context, JC, you need to go hunting for tsunami deposits in the right places. You need to be in a tidal zone. You need to be in a place where you're going to have these tsunami waves crashing into this otherwise muddy environment. And most of the glacial sands are up and out of those modern current tsunami. Remember, the tsunamis that we're looking for are really in the last 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. In other words, much younger than the ice story. So therefore, those deposits are kind of geographically sorted out already. Hope that makes some sense to you. What street is the Seattle Fault on in downtown Seattle? It's basically underneath I-90, and just if you're driving into downtown Seattle from Ellensburg, and you don't even get off at I-5, you just keep going straight west and you get off at the stadiums. That's it. Seattle Fault's right underneath there. I don't have a street for you. And in truth, the Seattle Fault has a bunch of little strands. It's not one like crack. There's a number of cracks that come up to the surface. Does the water flowing under ice sheets leave any deposits? Troy, out here in eastern Washington, north the Waterville Plateau, there are these wonderful features called eskers, which are clearly tunnels at the bottom of the ice that are kind of snaky, and they're just chock full of these river cobbles. This is kind of different than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these truly north-south trending troughs that are a much larger and deeper scale than these little kind of meandering rivers. So I guess what I'm saying is, what made these huge troughs, like Lake Washington sits in a trough that's hundreds of feet deep compared to the kind of drumlin-like ridges on both sides? What's up with the troughs? Is it really the ice that did the digging? And if they did, why did it dig so much and then on Mercer Island didn't dig at all? And then, that sort of thing. Great questions. Did the channels of the sound exist before the ice, or are there drainage systems for the lobe? I think it's fair to say, I've already erased everything, it's fair to say that all of the drainage, all of the hills and valleys, all the inlets, all the water is younger than the ice, is younger than 16,500. Whatever that drainage system was like before and where the rivers were flowing got totally screwed up by all this glacial material getting dumped into that lowland. And then even more, in the last 120 years, white folks showing up started, putting in canals and blocking this and moving that. And so, there used to be an actual river, the Duwamish, that would snake its way all the way down to Elliott Bay, and that's been channelized. And so there's been, incredible engineering. I won't say my opinion on the engineering, but there's been incredible amounts of manipulation since the 1870s. What are the ages of the rocks exposed by the Seattle Fault? In the neighborhood of 40 to 60 million years old. That's the Blakely Formation. There's probably some other local formation names that I don't know. And then can I think of the coal bed formations? I don't know very much about those rocks, but it's a significant step older, quite a bit, by tens of millions of years. We're leaping from the Ice Age to those old bedrock layers. Blue agates and the Issaquah, have you seen them? No, I haven't. First I've heard of that. What was the magnitude of the 900 AD Seattle Fault quake? Estimated at magnitude 7. Pretty difficult to estimate magnitudes based on that. Shaking my head because of this frickin' scrolling thing that I'll never figure out. But you've heard that every episode. Oh my God, there's so many questions. Is Newcastle anticline part of the Seattle Fault? Probably not. Much like if you saw the gold miner episode where Rob was in the backyard with me, we were talking about folding within the Squawk Formation before the Teanaway. And I think there's a lot of folding of those older layers. I think they're much older folds than the age of the Seattle Fault. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing. Is the Devil's Mountain Fault related to the Seattle Fault? I think it's a different fault. The LIDAR now has allowed us to remove magically all the trees and all the water, and it's from those detailed kind of, if you don't know what LIDAR is, it's this amazingly detailed portrayal of the hills and valleys, and these fault scarps have been found just in the last 10 years based on that. I mean, they're all related in the sense that they're all from the squeezing and they're all from the reverse fault action, but they're not all joining together, if that's what you're meaning. Does QG1 on that old Geology, on that old 1961 map that's now down at the high school 5 blocks away, does that mean Quaternary Glacial? Yes. Because of the 20-foot lift, do they have an estimate of the, roughly magnitude 7, but I don't really know how they came up with that. Maybe based on this. You know what? I got so many questions. I was going to say I was going to read Bree's email to you, but we'll do that another time. I might have her come back on a calm night. We can talk about tsunami in Puget Lowland. How does the soil? I'm very weak on soils. I don't know how to answer that question. What formed Hood Canal? Hood Canal's not really a north-south trough, but I can only guess that it's another one of these troughs we're talking about that we're not sure how they form. You know what I mean by a trough, right? It's like a gutter that's dug into a bunch of sand and gravel, but it's deep and significantly wide and now holds a bunch of water. Why? I don't know anything more about Hood Canal than that. Can I talk a little bit about the Osceola mud flow? Well, I kind of, Jeff, is that the Jeff that I know? We did have an episode talking about Mount Rainier and the Osceola mud flow, but for those that didn't catch it, 5,600 years ago, so that's since the ice was here, right? 5,600 years ago, not 15,500, whatever. The northeast portion of Mount Rainier fell. Like a quarter of the mountain broke and down the White River. And that one singular event called the Osceola mud flow came right down the White, right over Greenwater, if you know that little logging town. There was about 50 feet of liquid concrete coming down that valley, probably 40 miles an hour. And that lahar made it all the way to Commencement Bay. And for the first half of the 20th century, nobody realized it was a lahar or volcanic mud flow, the Osceola, until Rocky Crandall made the discovery in the 1950s. However, as I mentioned in Jerry Harlan Brett's episode, he had it figured out in 1911, but nobody knew about it because he was a joke. So there's, and that side of Rainier has rebuilt itself to a certain amount, but the most significant concern now for future mud flows is the west side of Rainier. The rock on the west side of Rainier is quite rotten. You can take certain bedrock layers on the west side of Rainier and just crush the rock in your hand. It's so altered to clay. It's so rotten from geothermal gases and water percolating through that side of the mountain. So that's a big reason that Ording, the little town of Ording, has all these drills to evacuate and get out of the town, get out of the valley as quickly as possible. And I've had many students at the college here from Ording, and they all kind of talk about it like it's kind of a joke, like they do their drills, but nobody takes it very seriously. And unfortunately, that's the way most of this stuff works. If your grandpa didn't remember it happening, then I guess it's not a real thing. Just like my grandpa didn't remember about the virus that went globally. You know, it's one of those. It's just, why should I listen to the science person? I'm sure they've got some agenda, is the general thought. We don't need to go further there, do we? Is the hill north of Tenino a glacial moraine? I don't know that hill. Cheen Hill? I'm sorry, Bill, I don't know, but you're right there at the edge of the ice, so probably. Phoenix, age 9. Thank you for joining us, Phoenix. If you know how big the ghost forest is, well, if you're talking about the little forest I was talking about tonight, and I guess I'm not calling it a big forest, if you're talking about that underwater forest in the bottom of Lake Washington that was killed by the Seattle Fault earthquake, 900 AD, more than 1,000 years ago, I don't imagine huge redwood trees. I imagine just normal trees like in your backyard, Phoenix. But they happen to be still standing in the bottom of that lake. And apparently boaters on Lake Washington knew about those tree limbs down there because they would get hung up on it. They said, don't go over there. There's a bunch of trees at the bottom of the lake. I assume that's what you're talking about. If you mean the ghost forest on the Washington coast, that's a different topic, and those trees are very tall, taller than my house. Thank you for the question, Phoenix. Why is the riverbed clay blue? Well, that blue clay is you need standing water. So I meant to say there's blue clay over here on this side of the mountains where we used to have mountain glaciers. Same idea. Stop the water, trap the river water, get standing water. And the blue color, I assume, is coming from some organics that are in that lake, but I don't know much about the biology, the chemistry. Does the fault move horizontally as well as vertically? I think so. I think it's mostly a vertical thing because it's an east-west trend to those reverse faults, so there's not a horizontal component like you have with some other faults. Let's do a few more. It's already after 7 o'clock. I'm having fun, though. I got another prop for you, too. I haven't even used yet. We'll do that with our toast tonight. Average depth of the glacial till in Puget Sound. I should know that. Hundreds of feet. Thick. On bedrock. Again, almost all of Puget Lowland on the surface is glacial deposits. It's just south of I-90, essentially, where you've got the bedrock. Kind of get his chin up above all the glacial stuff, and that's because the Seattle Fault earthquakes kept lifting that immediate south side of the fault. How much uplift or how much rebound to the crust since the retreat of the ice? Hundreds of feet. I guess that's my answer tonight. Bill, I'm going to hold off on yours. The question is about which is worse. Are you going to have tsunami coming into Puget Sound from a great earthquake out at the ocean or a local earthquake in Puget Sound? I think I've decided right now that I need to keep Bree McGinnis, my neighbor. She lives about 6 blocks away. Have her come over and join me. We'll stay our 6 feet apart. But she does fascinating work, and she was trained in the department with Brian Atwater and her advisor. Can't think of her name, but the majority bourgeois or something like that. I had to reconnect, hit a reconnect button, which I haven't seen before. Are you still with us? I need a yes if you're still with us. Looking for some yeses so that I can continue. Thank you, Warhawk. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, good. I don't know if that was wind or what was. Let's finish out because I want to give you a toast and show you my other prop. I'm from Wisconsin, where the drumlins are textbook. They're hills. Drumlins are hills made out of glacial till, and from the air they look like spoons. And there's a tail to the south side, and there's kind of a bulbous north side to these amazing streamlined hills called drumlins. If you look in the literature for downtown Seattle, every hill is a drumlin. Mercer Island, Beacon Hill, First Hill, all those are Queen Anne Hill. They don't look like drumlins to me because I'm snobby about it, because I'm from a great place for drumlins. But I guess you can call them drumlins. 3 more questions and we're going to the big finish here. The Mima Mounds are probably worth a whole live stream on their own. We don't know what's going on with them. It's one of the biggest mysteries that remain, but they are kind of in the neighborhood of our glacial deposits. So let's hold off on that. Okay, getting a lot of repeats here, so I think we're pretty much there. Cames or Came terraces, I'm always fuzzy on Came terraces. They don't make a lot of sense to me. So no. Okay, toast for you. I got to get my coat. Now, I wanted to show you the Jello to kind of indicate that I'm afraid we're going to get some of this with the next Seattle earthquake, and we can all hope and pray that we won't have that anytime soon. We now have some dried leaves and some other things that have blown onto the top of this Jello, but let's go ahead. Here's to you and the health of your family, and the health of you and the health of your friends and all of your loved ones in your network of wonderful people. I think that was an insect. Let's get another one. And in honor of this being such a staple in the upper Midwest where I grew up, I was busy in the kitchen this morning. You know what this hot dish is? This was my favorite casserole at age 5, age 10, age 27, age 53. What kind of casserole is it? Tater tot casserole, baby. Here's to you. Here's to the health of your parents and your grandparents. Health of your children and your grandchildren. Those around the world. Tomorrow night, if you're free, talk about a mountain pass called Snoqualmie Pass, which is just to the east of Seattle, the most heavily traveled road over the Cascades here in the Pacific Northwest. Many of you know it quite well, and we will reveal some of its secrets. 6 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow night. Thanks for joining us. I love you.